Hello, and welcome to Saving People Queering Things, a Supernatural podcast. We were previously known as Driver Picks the Podcast, and the episode you're about to listen to was recorded under that name. Though our name has changed as of season 3, our show hasn't changed that much. Our structure and theme-based discussions are the same, and we're so glad you're here. Now, let's get on the road. Hello, and welcome to Driver Picks the Podcast, the show where we talk about ghosts, road trips, and free will through every episode of the TV series Supernatural. In this show, we use theme discussions, meta-analysis, and textual criticism, including queer, feminist, and film theory, to dive deeper into Supernatural and treat the show as a sacred text that can teach us things about ourselves, our relationships, and our lives in this world. Today, we are discussing Season 2, Episode 2, Everybody Loves a Clown, through the theme of survival. I am Abigail, your host, and joining me today is KJ from the Supernatural Opinions Podcast. Welcome.
Hi, it's so good to be here.
I was really lucky to be on their show just a few weeks ago, and KJ, I'm so excited to have you here to talk about this episode that you selected to be on. Do you want to introduce yourself and talk about your own personal connection to Supernatural?
Yeah, totally. I'm KJ, and I am the host of Supernatural Opinions, and yeah, we recap Supernatural as well. We're a few episodes behind, but and then every 5th episode we take a break from recapping and we do a cross show discussion about a different topic. They're very fun. It just gives us a little break from the thing. Also, we can, talk about some stuff that we might not get to for a few years.
I appreciate those episodes so much because you get to.
They've been some of my favorite ones, honestly. Yeah,
me too.
It's just really freeing to not have to monitor for spoilers. Also, yes. It's a really long stretch between the start of the show and like Cass. I miss him.
We've started having to do mini episodes because I can't keep my mouth shut about Cass in most episodes, so we almost always have to cut something and be like, oh, this is going to be a mini episode because
and like I don't know like when this episode is going to come out, but we're like right between the anniversary of the confession and the anniversary of the show ending.
yep And this episode will come out right after the couple weeks after the anniversary of the show ending.
And so there's like a lot of fandom stuff going on and a lot of discussions.
All the cons right now are also happening.
Yeah, that too. Like we're getting a lot of new-ish content.
Yeah, for good or for bad.
Yeah, it's a time.
It is a time.
But yeah, I've been watching Supernatural for like 6 years on and off. But when I watched the whole show from the beginning up to the end to watch the end for the first time last year, I was like, I want to make a podcast about this. And so, yeah, I did. It took me 6 months to actually do it, but
hey, still you're here and it's great. We I think unofficially are like sister podcasts. Like,
oh, totally.
It's great. Or sibling podcast. It's great. It's really fun. Kind of by accident, we stumbled upon each other.
Time, like within a couple weeks of each other.
Yeah, within a couple weeks of each other, and then stumbled onto each other on TikTok. I think I found you on TikTok before I actually found your podcast. I think that's how I found out about Supernatural.
Yeah, I started making Supernatural TikToks like a couple of months before I actually like had an episode.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've definitely, I think we like connected on TikTok just because I've been making Supernatural content there separate from my podcast.
Yeah, but it's very fun. It is now time for our series recap, The Road So Far. So this is only the 2nd episode of this season, so this recap will be short. If you need full context, go back to our season 1 recap episode, which was released a couple of weeks ago, and our season premiere episode, which was released last week. So, John Winchester is dead, having made a deal to save Dean from dying of his injuries from the car crash caused by a demon at the end of season 1. The yellow-eyed demon is still loose, and Sam and Dean are truly alone for the first time, with no idea what to do next. That brings us to this episode and to our 30-second recap.
Yay, 30-second recap.
Welcome to the part of the show that all my co-hosts hate me for.
It's my first time, so I'm trying not to be nervous about
Oh, it's okay. You cannot fail at this.
That is true.
There is no failure in these recaps, only hilarity. I will count you in. 3, 2, 1, go.
So Dean and Sam are trying to recover from their father's very recent death. They're handling it really differently. Sam gets in contact with one of their dad's estranged contacts, Ellen Harvelle, who offers help with the demon that killed her mom. She lets Sam take a case that she heard about with a killer clown. And Sam has colorophobia and is very uncomfy the whole episode. And the boys fight a lot about how they're going to grieve John. And that's pretty much the episode. I have like 4 seconds left.
Can you count me in?
Yeah. 1, 2, 3, go.
Okay, so Sam and Dean are mourning their father. Dean is fixing up the very broken up Impala, and in their hunt for the demon again, they end up at Ellen and Jo Harvelle's, a roadhouse that seems to cater to hunters, and there seems to be some sort of history with Ellen and John, though they don't know what it is. Ellen sends them on a hunt where there are killer clowns, but the real focus of this episode is on Sam and Dean's different reactions to the grief of losing their father and the regrets that they have about their relationship with him.
Impressive.
Yeah, we got different emotional beats.
I can't believe I didn't mention the car.
You know, it's...
You can only fit so much into 30 seconds.
You can only fit so much into 30 seconds. It is now time for us to discuss this episode through our chosen theme. And this week, our theme is survival, which is incredibly ironic, coming right after last episode and John Winchester's death. Well, in the terms of the theme of survival, if you have anything you want to like start with,
okay,
you can jump in and then we'll kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I think we just gotta start off with the John being dead. The
opposite of survival.
Yeah, literally the opposite of survival. John could not be less surviving. But Sam and Dean have survived.
Mm-hmm. And Dean wasn't supposed to survive.
Yeah, he came pretty close to not surviving.
Yeah.
I think there's some survivor's guilt happening.
Ooh, I like that. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. But yes, there definitely is.
Because, his dad sacrificed his life and probably his soul.
Yeah, and even though he doesn't know that, he sort of knows that things aren't right. We talked a bunch last week in our episode on In My Time of Dying. We talked about how that episode really is a mirror to Faith, the Faith episode. And I think in the same way that Dean feels that incredible guilt in Faith for surviving when someone else dies, even if he doesn't know directly that it was a direct trade of his life for John's life, I think he knows that he wasn't supposed to make it.
I don't know when they just kind of like accept that to be a fact. I know it's not this episode or like super soon, but I know at some point they definitely like put the pieces together on that one.
Yeah, I think it might even be, I'm trying to remember when it is. It might even be by the Crossroads episode. Might be that episode that they actually figured out.
I think by then, like, Dean's got to figure it out, but
yeah. But he doesn't remember all the things that happened when he was.
Yes. I forgot about that, except for the fact that I happened to watch the next episode that we see Tara in, like, last night or the night before. And I was like, oh yeah, I forgot that Dean forgot all of that.
Yeah, I did too until I was looking at a wiki about the episode and I was like, oh, he forgets. Okay. And he does remember later on.
Fun. The show can just choose to do that, I guess. It's their prerogative.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Another thing I was thinking about in terms of survival is that like the car almost doesn't survive. Like in the previous episode, Bobby says, it's
DOA, like forget about it.
Yeah, goodbye. And the car only survives because like Dean like physically with his own hands brings it back.
I had not thought of that at all, but that is totally true.
Yeah, I think it's him working through his grief in not knowing that he's working through it, not knowing that that's what he's trying to do, but it's like the only thing he has power over and agency over. He can fix the car.
It's like his big connection to John also, like his big thing that belongs to John.
Mm-hmm.
Like, even though like it's Dean's baby, Like, it was John's baby for like 20 years.
and even like the emotional complications of, I think of like the episode where John tells him off for like quote unquote not taking care of her.
I've made too many TikToks using that scene.
Yeah, but like that too is like, you know, his relationship with the car is all tied up in his relationship with the dad.
Yes.
And it's complicated, just like I think Dean in some ways in the end of season 1 and the beginning of season 2 has just sort of started to reshape the way he thought about his relationship with his dad, to like some of the cracks have started to show, and he started to see his dad being a shitty parent.
Yeah, definitely. Like he can't save his dad, but he can fix that car.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sam is like trying to keep John alive through their revenge on the demon, a lot in the way that John was trying to keep Mary alive through revenge.
And that's so interesting, because we've been talking about how like the revenge mission for Sam has been so driving this whole season, and then in the finale and the premiere of season 2
he just like gives it up
for Dean, but now he wants it back for John.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh,
yeah. And I think for Sam in particular, like finding their dad was the thing that was keeping him going after Jess died.
Mm-hmm.
And then once they found John, then they were going to kill the demon. Now John's dead, and so now they have to kill the demon, and it like keep John alive.
Right, yeah, John has to survive. Like, it's the only way that John's memory can survive, and that it can maybe not feel worth it, but in some ways feel almost worth it that they lost John.
Yeah, and it's like his legacy, and even though his legacy should really be them.
Yes,
it's somehow not.
But John always told them that, like, even in the last episode of season 1, you know, killing the demon comes first before anyone.
Yeah.
Sam is well, and we see throughout this whole episode Sam identifies it with a lot of actually emotional maturity. At the end of the episode, he's like, I do feel guilty. Mm-hmm. I do feel like a bit lost, because I was angry at him, and I was angry at him for most of my life, and I regret that, and I regret the fact that now, like, it's too late. It
annoys me so much that the writers backed off of that aspect of Sam.
Yeah, it was such a good element of his like arc, his emotional.
It's like one of the few things about Sam that I think is well written in the early seasons. Like, Sam is a pretty underwritten character as far as main characters go.
Yeah, he's a plot device in a lot of ways.
Yeah, like but like this, like one thing that he has that Dean just cannot have. No. Until this episode. Yeah. Is that Sam's always been the first one to call John out and accept that John's flawed, and the fact that he then like turns around in like later episodes and later seasons and is like, John was fine.
Yeah, it never made sense. It never made sense. Like, the only way I can ever make it make sense is that Sam has like worked through the personal elements of it for himself, and it doesn't affect him anymore in the same way. But not that he actually changes his mind on it, because it doesn't make any sense that he would you know, Sam very clearly, and we see this in all of the flashback episodes throughout the years too, like Sam very clearly having enough of John's bullshit and being like, no, I see what's happening here. I see you're being a shitty parent. I see that you're not prioritizing your kids. I see that you are like angry and obsessive.
Dangerous, like straight up dangerous.
And I love that this arc in this episode for Sam, because I think you're right, he's trying to help John's memory survive, but he's also trying to let his own innocence survive. He's trying to like even some ways rewrite the relationship that he had with John, because if he doesn't, it's just really devastating that the last conversation they had was a fight.
Yeah, they never got to like make up, and they never got to really talk about anything. Like, they never even really got to talk about this like shared experience of like Mary and Jess both dying, and them both like seeing it and surviving. Like they both had this like shared thing where they watched the woman they love die, and just had to stand by and watch and live with that forever.
had to continue surviving when they
just never even really talked about it more than like, I'm sorry about what happened. Like,
and they like, we've got so many references to the similarities between the two of them in that, like, that starting point. And like, in a lot of ways, John is what Sam could have become if he hadn't had Dean. And you know, Sam's survival as more than just an obsessed bastard looking for the thing that killed his girlfriend. Like, his humanity survives because of his relationship with his brother.
Totally.
And in this episode, that's why I think Sam is challenging Dean to like grieve and to not keep saying he's fine, because he's like, we've got to face this. We can't ignore it, or else we will just become not something less human, something not.
That was the other big difference. Like, aside from Dean, the other big difference between Jess and like Mary's death is that Sam like wanted revenge, but like he didn't throw his whole, I mean, he kind of did throw his whole life away, but
whole like normal life away.
He didn't throw his whole like
humanity?
sense of humanity away.
A relationship. He didn't like burn every other bridge in his life
to the ground. Like, he still valued his other like relationships. Like, he's like, even his like friends, like, he like never sees again, like Zach and Becky. He still like dropped everything to go help Zach and Becky.
Yeah, he still is positive. He still like builds positive connections with people.
Yeah, whereas and you know, John.
and like John, even when John interacts well with people, it's usually with ulterior motives, and we don't get that impression from Sam in the first season.
Sam genuinely like cares about helping people.
Yeah, he gets blinded by that obsession and that revenge mission sometimes, but he comes back. I love that. So kind of like connected to that, I wanted to talk about we kind of talked about the way that Sam is trying to survive losing John. And in a lot of ways, it's actually a pretty mature emotional response. Kudos, Sam, for having a mature emotional response to losing your parent, but being like, I have a lot of feelings. I'm going to try and express them. And, you know, it's not perfect, but it's something. In contrast to the way Dean is trying to survive losing John, which is to say no less than, I noted like 4 different scenes in this episode where he says, I'm fine, I'm okay, it's all right.
Also with John dying, I mean, we don't know, for like intents of not being spoilery, we don't know what John says to Dean right before he dies, thing. But like, back to our theme of survival, like, that's a pretty big thing where now Dean's like also dealing with John's death, but also like he has to start being like, okay, how am I gonna keep Sam alive?
Yeah, and I think we can infer, because of what's happening in that scene, we can infer that what John tells him is about Sam.
Yeah,
there's a reason,
and it's not good, just based on the look on Dean's face.
Yeah, and we also know from the episode is the conversation with John and the demon, where the demon says, you know, I guess you've worked it out, the truth about Sammy and all the other children. And John says, yeah, I've worked it out. So we can kind of be like, okay, there's something about Sam and also some other kids, and probably something of that is what he's told Dean. And so Dean's also carrying that and being like,
yeah. And all of season 1, we had like, as Sam's been developing these like psychic powers that aren't really super relevant in this episode, but like they're always kind of in the background. Like,
they're
the line
ominous.
Between human and monster is getting a little thin, and Sam is sitting pretty much right on that line.
And we keep getting these moments of like demons being in humans' bodies, of like monsters taking possession of humans. And, you know, even in an episode like this, monsters masquerading as humans. That you're right about that line. Like, and you know, like, so even Dean's own life is now tied up in monsters, his own existence, because now twice there's been instances where something should have killed him and then he didn't die, but it's not like he should have survived. There's something
he just happened to have survived because of some supernatural intervention.
And so he's carrying all that survivor's guilt from now twice in the past, you know, 6 months, having these things happen. And Sam has survivor's guilt too, from surviving both of the times that people died in front of him. That nice little parallel of they both now had these parallel experiences of almost dying, and what does that say about me and who I am, and do I deserve to be alive? And well, with Dean it's like, do I deserve to be alive? And with Sam it's like, what's wrong with me?
Yeah, and I mean, any of them could have just died in this accident. Like, the fact that it was Dean who was on the chopping block is just like the good narrative choice. But like, in a real life car accident, again, their car does not have seatbelts.
Also, in a real life accident, if a semi hits that car, they're all dead. They're
all dead. 100% all dead.
They're not making it to the hospital.
The car does not have airbags or seatbelts. Like,
that was the first thing Jacob pointed out when we watched, after we got out of watching that episode. He was like, he's like, I know they're not dead, but like they should be. And I was like, yeah,
they 100% should have.
You're right. They could have done a smaller vehicle to hit them and might have been a little more believable. Kind of moving from a little bit from the theme of survival, because we need to be able to talk about Ellen and Jo, and we'll see if we can tie it to the theme, but we need to talk about Ellen and Jo because that's really the biggest reason.
I love Alana Tall so much. She plays Jo. She's in Veronica Mars.
I forgot, first off, how young she is in this episode.
Yes.
Like, as a character.
We're unclear on how old Jo is supposed to be, but I'm pretty sure it's 2 years younger than Sam.
Yeah, so we're like 20-ish.
Yeah.
20-ish. First off, just in a continuity note, like Ellen and Jo's is a really easy place to break into for a place that hunters frequent.
They just wouldn't be open during the day. Like, that makes sense to me that they're just only open in the evenings.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, it's a frequent, like, hunter frequented bar. And like, were they watching Sam and Dean break in? Were they like,
and also,
where were they? Where did Jo come from?
I also like, I get it, because they wanted to set up this funny scene where they get outsmarted by the girls and they get guns pulled. Like, they wanted to set up that scene. That's a really funny introduction scene. It's just like a little bit stretches the like reality of this.
Yeah, I just imagine them be like, someone's trying to break in. I'm gonna hide in the kitchen. You hide behind this chair.
Julie loved that from the point of view of like them just being like, we can take them. Doesn't matter who they are. We can take them.
Such a great introduction, honestly, to their characters.
Yeah.
A lot of characters that they wanted to be like strong female characters are introduced this way, where they like have them outsmart like the guy, the big, strong guy characters.
Which is, it is super tropey. And like, in terms of like representation for female characters, like, I wish that they had more than one way of doing that. But if they're going to do it, at least I prefer this to the other way that they usually introduce female characters, which is by over-sexualizing them. So at least this moment isn't.
I mean, we got there in this episode.
We got there within 2 minutes, but
we took a break from it. We didn't start there.
I mean, Jo makes a really funny comment at the beginning after Dean says, "Oh, please let that be a rifle," and Jo says, "No, I'm just really happy to see you." Which
that is,
it's funny on many levels.
Pretty solid, honestly. I mean, everybody in this universe is really quick with the one-liners, and I'm not mad about that.
It's a suspension of reality in TV that I always love.
Like, it really sets the tone for Jo's character.
Yes.
For her for that to be the first thing that she says.
Mm-hmm. Of like, she's not going to take. She can keep up, and not only keep up, but like she can run circles around them.
Yeah.
Like, she is never on the defensive.
Yeah, because that's very clearly the joke that Dean was making.
Yep.
And then she just like was like, okay, I see your joke and I'm gonna roll with it because I'm not.
And she's like, I'm gonna roll with it and I'm gonna,
improve it. I'm gonna make it better.
Yeah.
She punches him in the nose and then he like can't see. And I like that he is just taking out. That's a really simple self-defense move to keep in your back pocket.
Yeah.
If you get hit in the nose, your eyes are gonna water. Like
you get that she gets the jump on him and she knows her mom's right there. She knows it's just a matter of like, she doesn't need to do very much. And I mean, she also, I'm sure, like, knows pretty quickly. She's seen enough hunters in her life to be able to recognize when someone's like a hunter.
Yeah.
What I did really love too about this intro, like you talked a little bit about Jo, but also with Ellen, like I loved how like warm she was with Sam and Dean once she knows who they were.
She knows. The Winchesters, and she's like, welcome to my home.
Which is so interesting because they've never heard of her. There's clearly a weird undercurrent of like something went sideways with Ellen and John. But I love that Ellen has not let that like taint her idea of these boys without a mom, these like hunter kids. Like she clearly has just this like warmth towards them as hunter kids, which is coming from, you know, she also has a kid who's a hunter kid. Like
it's the same thing as like with Jo, who's our actual kid, and like Ash even.
Oh yeah, Ash is her other kid. She talks
to Ash, yeah.
Ash is her other kid.
It's so weird in my mind that Ellen does, like, the boys don't know Ellen. Assuming that, you know, weird. They would have been like, so like assume that, you know, like they wouldn't have seen Ellen like since her husband died. So assume they would have been like 12 and 16.
Yeah,
like
they would remember her. It seems
out of character for John to not be dumping them on Ellen.
Yeah.
Back in the day, like, you know, like they weren't babies, they were 12 and 16.
So I wonder if we're going there 12 and 16 and we think of like other, this is going to be a little spoilery. Yeah. So we think about other events that we know happened that year. So that's the year that Dean spends like 3 months in the children's home.
Yeah, that's true.
There's a lot of tension between Dean and John in that year. And also a lot of evidence is that John like is too prideful and too stubborn to like give them the best opportunity, you know, like that he that was to keep them with it.
I literally made a TikTok and I got a couple of people who commented like, well, like, you know how like he stopped leaving them with Bobby because Bobby was treating them like kids too much and like parenting them too much.
Yeah.
Ellen would have been parenting them.
Oh, Ellen would have been parenting.
Ellen's parenting them now in their 20s.
Yeah. Ellen wouldn't, there's no way Ellen wouldn't have made sure they like went to school, would have made sure they did things other than like practicing shooting. You know, wouldn't have let like if they had been at Ellen's and John had been like, yeah, I'm gonna come and take this 14-year-old on a hunt, Ellen would have been like hell you are, like absolutely not.
You leave him right here.
You're like, he's a kid, you don't get to take him, you'll be fine.
Yeah, I literally went and checked the ages because I was like, Ellen says that, oh, like I know how close you were with your dad to Dean, so like she obviously knows that Dean and John are very close.
But if it was like 10 years earlier, it's been 10 years, and so she will clearly remembers or knows about it just doesn't entirely make sense that they wouldn't
have some idea of who she is.
I mean, it was similar with, it wasn't exactly
also,
the same.
Did Bobby not? Did they're like, Bobby, we're gonna go see this Ellen person, and Bobby didn't bother to tell them anything?
Yeah, it's weird with both the introduction of Bobby and the introduction of Ellen. Like, I think they clearly, I think this is just probably mostly just a writing thing where they didn't realize how significant these characters were going to be.
Oh yeah, they definitely never intended for Bobby to be like.
Yeah,
I feel like we learn a lot about John weirdly in this like kind of like first few scenes where they're at the roadhouse. Like something, I don't know, I feel like it's been mentioned a few times in season 1 was that John is really good at like seeing patterns of monsters that like other people don't see. Like I remember in like, I think it's like Asylum, I think it was Scarecrow. It was Scarecrow, where even though Sam was really mad at their dad and he didn't want to go on that hunt, he was like, how did dad even
right, how did dad pick up this pattern? It doesn't it's not
like, it's not one couple goes missing a year in like a general area
and you managed to figure out
like
why.
They're all from different places, they're all on like road trips, like, and you managed to figure out that one couple a year was going missing. Like how do you see that? And we see that like again, like Ash immediately like is like, no one can track a demon this way.
It's so interesting. Like we have I feel like we've had this debate on our show multiple times in season 1.
Is John a good hunter?
Is John a good hunter? And I feel like this is just a debate that happens.
Good at patterns. He's really good at patterns.
I think that's a really good observation. He's incredibly mediocre at maybe even some of the actual hunting things, but he's good at figuring out patterns. And you know, like the demon, I didn't want to be found, and he's been hunting it for like a couple of decades, and he did eventually manage to scour up enough to find it.
I feel like, my thing with John, I never want to give John the benefit of the doubt. But I think obviously something-ish happened the weekend that Jess died. But I think once Jess died, that was the thing that allowed John to be able to actually track the demon for real. He had a second data point where he was like, this was definitely 100% the same thing.
Yeah.
I know for a fact it was the same thing, and I know when it was here.
So okay, we'll give John Winchester points for that.
The man's dead. I think the least you can do is be slightly generous this week.
We'll be slightly generous this week, and only this week.
This one time.
We'll be like, John, you get A- for your skill in tracking the demon. I don't think I'm willing to give higher than that, but I can do that. We can do that. So one more point to kind of go back to the theme of survival. One thing that KJ pointed out when we were watching was in the scene where they're interviewing for the job. And KJ pointed out that Dean has never been to a job interview in his life. And I was thinking about that in the relation to the theme of survival with both Dean and Sam's, like the way they act in that scene, because they're trying to like be strategic, and made me think of like the different things that they've done to survive without having any normalcy in their childhood. Like Dean's never done a lot of the normal things, but manages to usually find ways to like get around in situations. And then sometimes has moments like this where it's just like blatantly obvious that
I forget what joke he made. He made some joke. I think he made some joke about Sam wanting to date the bearded lady or something like that.
Yeah, that's what he does.
In a job interview.
And it's just like,
like the carnival's not the most professional work environment in the world, but you're still in a job interview. And like that's just an inappropriate thing to say.
And his lying is like terrible. And usually his lying is not bad, but his lying in that scene is particularly terrible.
They're selectively good or bad at lying depending on the day.
He's usually good at lying, but in that scenario he's bad at figuring out what the correct lie would be.
That's actually totally it. Like he doesn't know what he's supposed to come off as.
Where Sam has a grasp of that and Dean just kind of screws it up, but Sam seems to have a grasp of it.
Sam talks in that, like, after that about not wanting to go back to school. And I think again it's the same, like finding dad was the thing that like saved him from having to like really like deal with Jess's death. And now that John's dead, he's like, okay, like Jess, now that John's dead, there's no possibility that they're gonna find John and he's gonna magically fix everything.
Right.
And so like that whole like dream of going back to a normal life is just also now gone.
And the fact I wonder too if that's also related to the fact that like it took so long for John to find the demon. And they've lost the demon's tracks again. They have they
lost the demon. Also, now they lost John. They're like, it could be 20 more years before
So maybe Sam is realizing that his life is going to be like John's. He's going to just spend the rest of his life looking for the demon. And if he's lucky, he'll make it out. Like if he's lucky, he'll kill the demon and survive. If he's unlucky, he'll be like John and maybe he'll get a shot at the demon, but maybe he'll also die. That's
a lot of the way Sam's also acting, like in this episode, feels a lot like, you know, he's trying to obviously, like we mentioned, like retroactively like repair his relationship with John.
Yeah.
He's also emulating Dean quite a lot.
Ooh, say more about that.
Because, you know, that's like this whole like do what dad would want thing's always been Dean's thing and not Sam's. And now that Sam's doing it, it really more reminded me of Dean than anything else.
Yeah, he's
kind of also like taking charge and steering them. He's like, well, Dean's not okay, so I'm just gonna take over,
right? Which
is not Sam's usual role at all. No. Usually Dean is the one who's taking care of them.
Yeah, and his only way of like taking and Sam's only way, like his only move, is to be like, what if I'm gonna be the one in charge? Yeah, I'm gonna keep us moving, but also like, what am I gonna do if I'm the one in charge? I'm gonna act like dad. Because like his two
that's
models,
what Dean does.
Exactly, his two models are John and what Dean acts when he acts like John. So like, and it just comes across as like him trying really hard to fit into
them,
and to fit into shoes. Like Hannah and I talked about this last week on our season 1 premiere about how like Sam doesn't fit in these shoes that John has always kind of tried to put him in, and he even especially now really doesn't fit because he started to choose Dean and family over the hunt, and now he's like caught in the crosshairs of like, I only have my brother left, we're in this together, but also the demon, also revenge. Now, you know, it's like all muddied up, and so he's like trying these things that just feel like he's grasping at. Sam does not become John, and we've like spent season 1 kind of wondering if he would, and now we're already getting that turn. He's going to go a different direction this season.
whatever the farthest direction he can get is.
Yeah.
But in this episode, he's really sticking with the mold. He is really trying to fill it. I think for the first time, really. Like, he's actively trying to fit that mold, where usually he's like, if I happen to fit that mold, then that's a coincidence more than anything else.
Well, yeah, and I'm gonna very distinctly be like, that's not because I'm like dad, and now he's like trying to, but it comes across in that he's really, really desperately trying to, both as kind of like making up for the past and because he doesn't know what to do. Yeah.
It's really hard to break out of a mold once the mold's been taken away. Like, his whole thing has been rebelling against their dad. Now their dad's gone. He doesn't have anything to rebel against either.
It's true. He doesn't. And Dean kind of points that out. Dean kind of goes like, dude, like, you fought with dad your entire life, and suddenly now you like want to follow. Now suddenly you want to do what he says. Like, now suddenly you want to follow his orders.
It does kind of feel like maybe Sam's picking that fight on purpose. Like, his whole thing's always been rebelling against John. Now John's not here. Dean's not going to argue with him for being normal.
Right. And so now he's got to rebel against something. He's got to rebel against Dean. And now Dean's perception of their dad, like, both of them, to survive John's death, they've both kind of come to different conclusions about the kind of father John was. And it's not the conclusions that they had in season 1. It's flipped. Whereas Dean seems to have a much more of a skepticism about John now than he ever had before. And Sam is playing up this like, no, of course we got to like do what dad would do. Yeah, and they're doing that as a strategy to try and cope with their grief.
Dean, his whole especially like from Something Wicked until now, like when we got the backstory in Something Wicked with those flashbacks of Dean's survival has depended on following John's orders. Now that John is dead, Dean doesn't need the security of John's orders being good or being the right thing. Like, it doesn't matter that, like, when your whole like survival depends on John's orders, then you need John to be a good dad. You need him to be this mythical hunting legend. But now that John's gone and Dean doesn't need those orders to survive, he can let go of this idea that John was this like mythical good.
I love that. And now he lets all that go, and that's why he's spiraling, because that's his whole framework for his life.
Dean needs John to be good and needs John to be this like hunter force that's for good, because he's put his whole self-worth into pleasing him. And
that's such a trauma response too, like when we think about especially childhood trauma, like that you remember things the way you, like, as a kid, if you go through really, really shitty things, you remember things sometimes the way you need to remember them to survive them. And Dean has remembered and personified.
Yeah, it's like how they remember Mary as this like perfect mom and perfect wife, because
and this is like a little bit of a spoiler, but not really, of like, there's a line much later in the show where it kind of comes out that John and Mary didn't have as perfect a marriage as has always been represented, and what Dean says to Sam is, it wasn't perfect until she died. And then the narrative had to become that, because you can't.
That's the same thing that is happening with like them now, is what was happening with John when Mary died, is like, Mary's dead and I didn't have a chance to make things right with her. If you rewatch the pilot through the lens of like something's wrong in John and Mary's marriage, they barely interact in that opening scene where they're like, it's like a perfect family moment. But like, where was John? Like, John's clearly just coming home. Because Dean is so excited to see him. He clearly hasn't seen John all day. And then as soon as John picks up Dean, Mary's like, okay, you got him, you're putting him to bed, gone. She leaves.
They don't have any, we don't have any.
And then he's sleeping on the couch downstairs, like.
They're very disconnected.
And
with what we know later, it's really indicative. Well, and with what we know about, like, again, spoilers, what we know about like Mary's own family and Mary's own family past, there's that like sort of repeating trauma throughout the generations of Winchesters and Campbells, where this is not a new pattern. Like, this is not new. The way of like, you think about your family and the way you need to survive. And then sometimes life hits you with a crowbar and you have to reimagine everything. And that's what both Sam and Dean are doing. And that's why Sam is now reimagining John as a good father, and Dean is reimagining him as not a good father. Okay, so next we're going to move into our Going Meta segment. In this section, we talk about some elements that make the show really fascinating to us, including its treatment of female characters. We explore the lore of the show's world, and we talk about pop culture and any other elements of the writing that we find really interesting. I think there are only distinctly 4.
Yeah, there's 2 sets of parents.
Yeah, 2 sets of parents in this episode in terms of just
they're all unnamed.
Yeah, they're all unnamed, but we'll call them our meaningful, victim deaths this episode, and there are no significant.
No, I mean, we see them burning John's body, but his death occurred last week.
Next, we have the Bechdel test.
I love a good Bechdel test. I do.
I know. I love that it's one of the things we share between us in both of our shows. Do we pass this week?
There's Jo and Ellen, so they're both named, so that's good. And then I think they're in a conversation, like a group conversation with each other. They don't have a one-on-one conversation.
Yeah, I'm always undecided as to whether or not it officially passes when it's a group conversation. But
they talked about John and they talked about the demon.
Which then again is, them talking about a man. So, but I think what I like about what feels like stronger for female characters in this episode is that we do have 2, for one, and they're well characterized.
Yeah, and they're gonna be recurring.
Yeah, so I mean, hindsight, we know that, but even if they hadn't been recurring, they still would have been like better written and more meaningful than like most of the female characters.
Yeah, the case in this episode was like honestly like not really the point of the episode.
No,
like,
we barely talked about it.
It was a thing to kill time.
Yeah, we literally, I don't think we talked about it for more than like a minute or 2 in our whole discussion.
But the focus was more like what's going on with Jo and Ellen and the Roadhouse and like their connection to John and Sam and Dean's connections to John and therefore to Jo and Ellen. Like,
yeah, and I think Jo and Ellen too. We get this representation of these 2 women who are running this business, who are taking care of themselves, who are capable.
They're also like pretty major players and a pretty like hunting appears to be a pretty male dominated profession.
Yes, every hunter we've met until this point has been male.
Yeah, and like they're around hunters all the time and like obviously not concerned with them. Jo like literally jokes about how like kind of like dorky they all are. Like,
how they all
think
of them
are the same. They all try and hit on her and she doesn't care for any of them.
Yeah, and with that too, they also seem to be a bit of a hub for hunters in terms of like they have the police scanner. They clearly are keeping really detailed. No, like they have file folders for cases. They're not doing that whole one journal with all of the information I've ever collected shit. Like they have like they're organized, which they and Ash.
Yeah, and Ash on his own. It blows my mind a little bit that Eric Kripke doesn't love the Roadhouse, that he hates the Roadhouse.
I don't know how anyone can hate the Road. I don't understand.
I don't even narratively. He made it sound narratively like it was a huge issue. Like he was really happy when it spoilers, like when it burns to the ground, he was excited for that. He was like, good riddance.
I do not understand Eric Kripke.
I don't think the bunker would exist if Eric Kripke had been writing in season 8.
I do not think that he ever anticipated or wanted there to be like the hunter networks that
exist. Yeah,
that honestly the show.
John's an anomaly for not having any friends.
Yeah, and I think that like it's really interesting to watch the show develop in that element. Which actually, this is going to move us right into lore, so we'll just continue talking about this under our lore check. But like the hunters. Yeah, John is this anomaly, and I think the show started out being like, we're going to focus on these like kind of solo hunters, but as the show develops,
a sporadic thing. They sometimes run across each other, but like it's really like a here and there. It's pretty rare to even come across another hunter. Like
but we clearly, but they can't get away from like the very human element of people need each other and people need support and Sam and Dean cannot,
and they need a starting spot. They need like the Missouri Mosleys of the show and like
and now
Bobby taught John how to hunt some stuff and Rufus taught Bobby
and now we're starting to get that connection. Is there any other like lore that you noticed in this episode that you thought was noteworthy?
We had killer clown
Yeah.
this week. And Dean and Sam are both like having this little argument, and like Dean's like, planes crash, and Sam's like, and apparently clowns kill. And like these are their two like big fears that we know about. Dean only has to get on a plane one time. It was in season 1, episode 4. Yeah. One time. This is Sam's first killer clown. It is not his last killer clown.
We come back to killer. It's like a horror trope, you know, killer clowns. We come back to it a lot.
I can think of 3 episodes that are killer clown related, like off the top of my head.
Yeah. I can think of at least I think there might be more than 3. That there are killer clowns.
None of them are specifically this killer clown. Like this,
just different killer clowns for different reasons, different monsters.
This thing was a Brashaska? I don't remember what it was called.
I think you're close there. I think that was,
It was an R, something like that. It was hard to say without like slurring some syllables.
Yeah. They said it was a Hindu myth.
SH sounds are kind of hard for me.
Yeah.
So like this specific monster I don't think we see again, but like killer clowns are gonna come back.
Yeah, though we see the base, like, to be fair, the baseline of this monster is pretty similar. Like, obviously the myth is distinct that this monster is kind of,
like we see lots of monsters like this.
Yeah, we see even monsters that like they talk about how this monster, you know, like lives on a bed of bugs, and we have other monsters that are
really similar. A meaningless detail, honestly. Like that must be lore specific, because it's like really not relevant. It's to the episode, like it's an excuse for them to split up, but we never see it like pay off for like
they've not even visually, not even a shot where like they're like, oh, we know it's him. Honestly, the way they know, Dane figures out that that's the monster, the particular character, is like
he finds the costume, like
he finds the costume, like it's not actually about the lore at all. So, and it's a little shaky, but they didn't spend that much time clearly working on the actual monster hunt of this episode. That was not the focus at all. No. So in terms of locations, this episode, as far as we can determine, the roadhouse where Ellen and Jo are is most likely somewhere in Nebraska.
So presumably also then the carnival is nearby if Ellen's picking it up on the police scanner.
Yeah, so they do distinguish that the carnival is in Wisconsin.
Okay, cool.
So that's
so like probably like the opening scene was probably somewhere nearby, and then the next one was
we jump back and forth
the next town to where they were.
Yeah, so it's like probably right on the border. I'm not gonna look that up more distinctly. The roadhouse is only significant because it's going to be recurring. So Nebraska is what we're going with. And in terms of filming locations, there's not really anything super distinct. They film at a fairgrounds, and you know, a bunch of roads and an auto shop, which again is kind of what you'd expect. I think the roadhouse itself is just potentially just a set piece.
That would make sense.
Because when I was looking up the location of it, it just sort of says on the site where I used to look up locations with someone who is really sourced to locations for filming, it just says it's kind of off of a street in a town near to where I grew up that has a lot of like kind of open roads and like big fields and lots of places where you could set up like a facade of a building.
That makes sense, honestly, because they want to have that like distinctive outside, like
kind of middle of nowhere sort of feel. We'll come back to location of the roadhouse and in terms of its filming the next time we see it. But at this point, it's just sort of in a random place. Next up is pop culture. There are not a ton. I mean, obviously, clowns.
I have a pop culture thing.
Go for it. Yes.
It's gonna be a little bit spoilery, but so warnings. But when Jo is talking about how all these hunters come in and hit on her, she specifically mentions side 1 of Zeppelin 4. And Zeppelin is a recurring theme. John and Mary fell in love over Zeppelin, the infamous mixtape.
Yeah.
Even in the Siren episode, they're like quizzing each other on like Zeppelin facts. Like
they use Zeppelin aliases a number of times. Zeppelin's a bit like in terms of music for Dean particularly, Zeppelin is very significant. So it's really hilarious thing.
But it's really associated with like a romantic intentions.
Which is so funny that Jo like uses it as sort of a not a derogatory, but uses it as a little bit of a dismissive thing of like, you know, every hunter and there's Zeppelin.
Yeah.
When we know for the Winchesters, it's and Dean particularly, like
it's like an extra level.
It's an extra level. There's a lot of lore, Winchester lore around that and romantic undertones, which is hilarious. That's a good, I'm glad you mentioned that because that's a really good note for pop culture. We also noticed the, you know, like Nintendo DS that the kid is using.
Yeah, the kid has a Nintendo DS, which I think only came out in like 2004 or 2005. So like would have been like pretty like top of the line thing to have in 2006, 2007.
So fair that the kid was more interested in that than the haunted house. That's, you know, fair.
I never had one, but like
no, me neither. Lastly, for our going meta, we're going to talk our gaydar section, our gender and sexuality studies section.
I literally forgot how Dean and Ash behaved around each other.
Me too.
In their first meeting. It is well. Okay, so if the intention was never by Dean, then what was the directing choices that were being
why
were you playing it that way, Jackals?
Why? And like the like this is the funny thing about any scene where you can read some like by Dean vibes is the best thing to do if you're like, is this a thing where Jensen Ackles is playing this more bisexual than they probably intended at the beginning? And usually my benchmark for that is like, what is Sam doing in this scene? If he's not doing like and comparing the two of them, and this scene is a good example. Sam is just like, Ash seems cool. He's like, wow, he's like impressed by Ash's skills. Dean's like, let me lean in, let me like reach over you, let me kind of like give you a side eye.
Talk about your hair like a lot.
Yeah, let me just like give you like kind of side glances and like
he literally stops Ash from walking away to tell him that his hair is cool.
Yeah, like when he's very clearly like the rest of this episode, like he is very, very caught up in everything that's been happening. He's not really very happy or enjoying himself.
Struggling to flirt with Jo.
Yeah, but he seems to have no problem with like the casual flirting with Ash. Jo presumably could be someone he could do something with, like, you know, internalized homophobia and all of that. Even if he is attracted to Ash, there's no way at this point.
Or he's
going to do
anything about Sam it. And Jo and Ellen all there as a witness. No.
He's not going to do anything more explicit. So it's almost safer to like half flirt with Ash and, you know, ignore that. And whereas if it comes to actually flirting with Jo, he has to admit that he's not in a headspace to do it because of everything, which, you know, good choices. That's a good choice that he makes, is to not.
It was intense, honestly.
Yep.
Jensen Ackles, please explain what choices you were making here and why. Because
yes,
he's always saying he's not choosing to play Dean as bisexual, but what were you doing then?
And what were you trying to do? Because it's very it's very unclear. I don't know how else you want.
What was happening?
So we will continue to read it the way we would like to read it. You know, this is a better representation for a female character, but it's still, you know, we still we'd like
also immediately more. After all that flirting with Ash, we immediately had a shot of Jo's butt,
which was just unnecessary and gross.
Yeah,
like, thanks 2006 television.
Yeah, I mean, I guess Jo's probably supposed to be 20, but we're not certain, and she definitely looks younger than the guys, and like Sam's 22, so like there's definitely a possibility Jo could be like 17, 18-ish.
Yeah, exactly. Like we don't know,
and it could be gross. It could be more gross.
And like we already have we were doing so well with Jo up until that moment where she's got personality, she's got character, she's got good lines, she's not over sexualized. And then we immediately are like, but what if?
And then Sam at the end of the episode too was like, as soon as the three of them were together, like Sam could have just like sat down, they could all had a beer together, but Sam immediately made it super awkward and being like, these two want to hook up.
I know. I was like, it's funny. And too, because I also like, and I mean, I'm coming also from knowing later stuff about them, but it's, not even when I first watched this season, I've like never actually like bought Dean and Jo having all that much chemistry. Like
I think honestly, aside from like a later thing that happens, I think that Jo and Sam have more chemistry.
Agreed.
This is maybe a little bit more on the straight end of the gaydar.
It's, gender, sexuality. It's all that. It's all in that realm.
But Sam is immediately like, Dad's never mentioned Ellen to us before. I wonder if Dad and Ellen slept together.
It is funny that he goes immediately to that.
He's immediately like that. And then, we have the whole thing where Dean's like, well, you never know. Sam is the one who's like, Dad falling out with literally everybody. But it is weird that like the things that we know about Ellen and Jo that they know about Ellen and Jo is that their dads were both hunters, and it's really weird that Sam's then like first assumption is that Ellen and John slept together.
Oh yeah, that is very weird.
Because the only thing that they know about Ellen is that she used to have a husband that died, and he was a hunter.
Right. So like, what does Sam think?
Does Sam think that happened?
Right.
Does Sam think that there was sleeping when Bill was alive, or when Bill
and that's why they're not. That's why
dead?
They never met Ellen because
I mean, it worked for Kate Mulligan.
That's all we gotta say about that. So finally today, we have a new question and answer segment. Either myself or one of our listeners are going to pose a question we have from this episode, and we try to answer it. And we're focusing on questions related to writing, filming, or acting choices specifically. If you would like to submit a question for this segment, please send us a voicemail using the link in the episode description, or tag us on TikTok or Twitter. Today, my question for you, KJ, is this. Something that came up when we were watching is, what is Ash's real reason for being in this hunting life?
How did he get here?
How did he get here? Do you have a, whether it's coming from things we know or things we don't know?
I looked it up briefly when we didn't know, and I could not find an answer.
There we go. So we could make up an answer.
Yeah. I checked the wiki page for Ash, and there was no information as to how he got here. Initially, when you were like, how did he get here? I was like, immediately I went to give you Garth's backstory, and I was like, that's Garth.
Wrong character.
Wrong person.
Similar vibes, honestly.
I feel like Jo and Ash probably met somewhere. And I don't know if Ash would have been hunting already, or if he like, Ash never really strikes me as like a hunter. Like he's not going out and doing it himself.
No. And Ash doesn't strike me as like, most people who are hunters have some sort of tragic backstory. He doesn't have that. Yeah. He doesn't have that vibe.
He's got a lightness to him that makes me think he's never really had to kill anything,
or that he's never lost someone super important to him.
Yeah. He is spoilers, but like in Dark Side of the Moon, when he finds out that Jo and Ellen died, like he's devastated, even though he's already dead.
Yeah.
Like, just the knowledge that they are not out there living their lives is devastating for him.
Yeah. I like the idea that he got brought in by Jo somehow.
Yeah, I feel like he and Jo met somewhere.
I feel like he might have some sad backstory, but not death related. Like he doesn't strike me as someone who has like a lot of family or friends. And
I feel like maybe, I don't know, Jo was maybe trying to hunt or like trying to do some like background like research or something, and they like cross paths that way.
Ooh, and then she realized how
he
crazy
was like,
intelligent he is.
I'll do this research for you, but I'm gonna need a lot of backstory, and so she just like told him everything.
You know what? Okay, spoiler alert. He's like Charlie.
Yeah,
he's like Charlie. He ends up becoming Jo's Charlie.
Yeah, literally, I think that's what happened. I think that, and then she just adopted him. She's like, "You're coming home with me now."
And then Ellen just was like, "Yeah, you can stay. You can be my other kid."
And she just like, "I just adopted a brother."
This
is my emotional support brother.
That's such a good answer to that, and I love it.
Honestly, writers try and tell us that we're wrong.
Yeah, honestly, provide some proof.
I'll be accepting no feedback.
Yeah, like if you can't prove that we're wrong, we're right.
Yes, literally.
How it works. We don't make the rules.
That's how I am about everything now.
Is there anything else you wanted to say on the episode in general, or anything that we talked
I think
about?
That was
Great. So that concludes our show for today. Thank you so much, KJ, for joining me.
It was so good to be here.
I'm going to put it in the episode description as well, but do you want to share where listeners can find you and your show and your social media?
Yeah, for sure. So You can pretty much listen to us at Supernatural Opinions Podcast pretty much anywhere you look for it, anywhere you like listen to a podcast. You can find me on all social media at Life Messes of KJ. And there's a link on all my social medias and any episode of the podcast where you can find all the podcast social media.
If you haven't yet, please subscribe to Driver Picks the Podcast wherever you get your shows, and come talk to us by sending in a voicemail or tagging us on Twitter or TikTok. Thank you to all of you for coming along for the ride, and we wish you a peaceful road until we meet again. Next week, we will be discussing Season 2, Episode 3, Bloodlust, through the theme of valor. A note to our listeners. This episode was recorded prior to our Season 3 name change, where we went from Driver Picks the Podcast to Saving People, Queering Things. For all of our new social media platforms, visit queeringthingspodcast.com.